I'm manifesting, right? Yeah!
These techniques are never taught to the average person.
I'm sitting in my car and I want to talk about manifesting.
Manifest your money, grow your income, scale your business.
Manifesting has become a kind of buzzword in our modern culture. Think it and it will happen, say many of the influencers you encounter online.
I owe the banks a lot of money, but little do they know, I just learned about manifestation. Now I'm gonna get so much money, I don't need a job. Why? Because I can manifest.
In all of the hype, the true meaning of manifesting seems to be misunderstood by most of the people who claim to practice it.
Hi, I'd like to share with you a practice.
James Doty is a neuroscientist and compassion researcher. He says manifesting is real, and he's done the research to prove it. Doty's work has provided scientific backing to some of the world's oldest ideas about what it means to be a good human being. On this episode of The InnerView, James Doty explains the science behind manifesting, how it really works, how we can benefit from it, and why it is so misunderstood by so many people. And Dr. James Doty joins us now on The InnerView. Neuroscientist, neurosurgeon, acclaimed author, distinguished professor, a lot of titles, investor, so many titles. Thanks for joining us. Which one's your favorite out of all those titles?
Being a kind human being. How about that?
Yeah, that's not so bad. Apparently, that will give you a good platform in life, according to your work, according to your talks. Tell us why compassion and being a good person is so important.
Well, if you look at our evolution as a species, actually we evolved to care because our offspring are typically small in number, and we require to be cared for well over a decade. And this is a long time in terms of time commitment and resources. So we evolved to care, but why would we care? Because we're rewarded. And there are certain neurotransmitters released, such as oxytocin, which many of your listeners probably know is called the love or bonding or nurturing hormone. When that is released, actually this results in your pleasure and reward centers being stimulated. But more importantly, your brain function and your peripheral physiologic function actually work their best. And this is because you have shifted into what we call your parasympathetic mode, which is a part of your autonomic nervous system. And that's where we're meant to live. So when we care, when we're kind, when we're thoughtful, these areas are activated. We feel good about ourselves. And certainly when we care for others, they are appreciative of us caring.
Is that what you mean by manifestation? Being nice brings about niceness, brings about good things?
Well, that's true. But as you know, the definition of manifestation is the ability to have your intention actually manifest. And the way to do that best is if your autonomic nervous system is not activated in the sense of stimulating your sympathetic nervous system, which is your stress response, your flight, fight, or fear response, but actually your parasympathetic nervous system is activated. And the reason that is because when you're anxious, when you're fearful, when you're stressed, this actually decreases the functioning of certain cognitive brain networks and actually interferes with your ability to manifest. The other problem is many people, based on what is promoted in society, which defines success as money, power, and position. But because of the activation of our autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic portion, many people actually are insecure or fearful. And as a result, they pick choices to manifest, which is about them. I want this, I want that, because society has said success relates to money, power, and position. And as a result, many people want to present themselves as being successful because they want external affirmation, because of their own insecurities, their fear of being judged, which is common in our society. So as a result, this is functioning through a fear narrative of insecurity. And as a result, your cognitive brain networks don't function as well. So in that mode, it is less likely that you're able to manifest, versus if you're in the parasympathetic nervous system, where you're thoughtful, you look outward about how you can be helpful, how I can serve, then all of your cognitive brain networks function at their best, because that's how we should act based on our evolution as a species. So I call that the difference between a fear and a love narrative.
Right.
Now, some people will sit there and say, well, are you telling us that we shouldn't have things? And this is not a anti-materialistic rant, but the reality is that if your motivation is to display external measures of success, then no matter how much external affirmation you get, you're never going to feel good about yourself or feel full. And what happens so often is that people use that to define themselves. And if that, unfortunately, is the case, you'll always be unhappy. Versus if you look at through the lens of being of service, of caring for others, what will happen is, one, you'll make people happier, you'll feel happier, but you'll also recognize that while there's nothing wrong with these external things, such as, let's say, living in a mansion or something, there's nothing wrong with that. But the difference is, if I were to lose all of my external displays of my success, it's irrelevant.
Right.
It doesn't matter. I am just as happy without any of those. They're wonderful, but they don't define who I am.
Your definition of manifestation seems to be the minority one at the moment. Even the YouTube algorithm doesn't quite get it, because even when we're looking for videos of yours and interviews with you, do you know what ads pop up? These scam artists who come and say, hey, I can promise you a Ferrari and girls and money and whatever. You can manifest, and there's a lot of snake oil being sold, and of course you need to pay them in order to manifest, all this abundance and so on. Does that irritate you? Does that frustrate you? Because they seem to have a monopoly on manifestation, which is the antithesis of what you're trying to do.
Well, of course, absolutely. But as you realize, in a capitalist society without any type of control over what is presented, there are very many opportunities to take advantage of people, or as you say, to scam people. And this is really unfortunate, because all of these ads have been created solely for the purpose of making money or charging the people who are putting the ads forward without any filtering. And this is why we have such a problem with social media, because if you push that narrative, unfortunately, you have many people who buy into it, and then they're focused on external affirmation or comparison. And this is why, unfortunately, we see influencers who present a false identity of themselves. They use filters, they use makeup, they use fake backgrounds to give a presentation that they are, quote unquote, successful. And of course, we know many of these people are not in any way how they present themselves, nor who they are. And this results because you're not living an authentic life, chronic insecurity. And as a result, this leads to stress, anxiety, depression, and unfortunately, suicide. And on the other side, of course, you have people who watch these individuals and they're living a lie. It's as if they're living in a movie. And it's not true. Yet, unfortunately, many young people and even older people buy into this, which creates their own anxiety and depression and fearfulness. And they get depressed and potentially commit suicide. And we've seen this over and over again. But sadly, this is the nature of what is becoming ever more a ruthless capitalist society, no longer interested in the individual, but interested in making money. And of course, these types of things, money, wealth, power, position, are the biggest false narrative about being a complete, fulfilled, flourishing human being.
I'm glad you're talking about material trappings. So you initially made a lot of money through investments, startups, and so on, tens of millions of dollars. This next question's in two parts. Firstly, tell our audience about how you lost that money, and then how you gave away the money that you realized you didn't lose and you still had. Tell us about that.
Well, perhaps very quickly, I should give you a little bit about my background. I grew up in poverty. My father was an alcoholic. My mother had had a stroke when I was a child, partially paralyzed, seizure disorder, chronically depressed. We were on public assistance. We had been evicted from multiple homes. So, of course, my orientation was, how can I get out of this situation? And you can read the story in my book, Into the Magic Shop. But regardless, I did end up being highly successful. I became a professor of neurosurgery at Stanford, was an entrepreneur, made millions of dollars. And unfortunately, I made some significant bets during the dot-com period. And as a result, in 6 weeks, lost almost $80 million and was $3 million in debt. And of course, this does get your attention, especially from the bank that I had borrowed $15 million from, because at that time you could take a loan about 25% of your publicly traded stock. And unfortunately, over that 6-week period when I had a lockout, I could not do anything but watch my assets decrease in value to the point where I was $3 million in debt and had to sell everything. And during this period of reflection, I also, of course, met with my attorneys, and it had turned out that an irrevocable charitable trust in which I had put stock in a company that I had run into for tax purposes, although it was a charitable trust, it turned out that they had never filed the paperwork. And as a result, my attorney informed me that I did not have to give any of that stock away. But after a period of deep reflection, I realized that my motives for almost everything I had done, whether it was to become a doctor, and this isn't to say I wasn't a good doctor, I didn't care, but it was about me showing people I was accomplished, I was a doctor, and expecting external affirmation. And this was the same as true of, making a lot of money, being an entrepreneur, driving a Porsche, wearing a Rolex, et cetera, et cetera. And when I lost everything, I went through this period of reflection, and I decided to go ahead after this period of reflection and understanding what had been driving me to change my perspective to one of being of service and looking at the world through that lens. So I told them to go ahead and give that money to charity while I was $3 million in debt. And that amount turned out ultimately to be $30 million. And the great thing was, though, that I tell people I went from rags to riches, which was really literally true, to rags again. But while I was a neurosurgeon and was making more than 99.9% of people, I still felt poor after I had this period of reflection. And so by giving all of that money away, which for many people, if you're poor, money is your identifier of your success, that actually took that monkey off of my back that had in part been driving me. And it allowed me to look through this lens and recognize that everyone is suffering, that I could be of service. So when I gave that stock away, what happened was I ended up setting up programs and health clinics around the world. I set up programs for the disabled and the disadvantaged. I set up scholarships and did many wonderful things. And ultimately, I founded the center at Stanford that studies the nature of compassion, altruism, and empathy. And what's interesting is that I ended up meeting the Dalai Lama, and he became our founding benefactor. And then I became chairman of the Dalai Lama Foundation, which ultimately led me to meet many of the spiritual and religious leaders throughout the world, including Pope Francis, Desmond Tutu, Thich Nhat Hanh, Amma the Hugging Saint, Eckhart Tolle, Byron Katie, a variety of others. And when I say I went from rags to riches again, what I mean is I ended up gaining so much from that experience, both in terms of my own happiness, but also being able to speak to, be with, learn from many of the leading spiritual leaders who frankly sit above the dogma because they look at our humanity as one humanity, that we're interdependent, that we're connected, and they offer us unconditional love and non-judgment. And this is really where we need to live in our minds, to look through that lens, because in fact it's true.
A lot of those people come from different spiritual traditions, contemplative traditions, that are nested within movements and groups that can also be used to justify atrocities, commit atrocities, wield power over other human beings. So what is it? What is it about them, and what is it about their approach? Because it's not any one school of thought. You said rise above the dogma. What is it about them that makes them rise above the dogma? So wherever they're coming from, there's an essence that is compassionate, real, true, and universally good. If you could identify that one thing, it is what?
Well, it's through deep contemplation and understanding the fundamental basis of every religion. And while in many areas, what has been learned experientially over thousands of years turns out to actually be based in science. And what is the basis of essentially every religion is compassion, and actually the golden rule. And this is what Karen Armstrong, who founded the Charter for Compassion, found after she won the TED Prize in 2008 and met with 19 different spiritual and religious leaders. And these individuals who I mentioned to you, they did rise above their dogma because they understand that for many people, the dogma gives them boundaries or in terms of moral and ethical behavior. But they recognize also that above that are universal principles, which in fact are truth. The problem, as you pointed out, where religion is used as a statement about our superiority or one group's over another, that is the nature of the ego of man. And it has, of course, failed us over and over and over again. And this is not to say that everyone needs to in any way be religious. And frankly, I'm an atheist. But what I do know, what is important, that all of us are in fact connected. We are interdependent. And if we live at that level, we are much more happier, we care more. And the other problem is that, unfortunately, contributes to our negative behaviors is a sense of tribalism, which is also part of our evolution. Because in a harsh environment, people had to stick together. And so by creating tribes in which you self-identify and makes you feel part of a group, that can be very helpful if you're trying to survive in a harsh environment. The problem is, and it occurs a lot today, and it doesn't necessarily even have to do with religion, is that that is part of our evolution, and many people can't get over that because they identify themselves with various quote-unquote tribes, which may be related to social class, it may be related to interests, it may be related to religion, but being in that group of people makes them feel safe. But unfortunately, that can also become an echo chamber and a place where people are given narratives over and over again to support their ego and their
Right.
sense of self-import. And this is where the problems in our society arise.
And a lot of these problems come from real injustices, trauma, individually and collectively as well. You speak of this kind of roadmap moving forward to manifest both as a process, but also kind of teleologically moving forward with compassion, with peace, giving away your things, the things that you don't need. But how do you solve that riddle of making peace with your past also? That W.H. Auden quote, I and the public know what all school children learn. Those to whom evil is done do evil in return. How do we disentangle the negative patterns, the terrible traumas of our own past, the guilt, the shame? You spoke of coming from a tough, rough background. How do you solve that and then move forward? Isn't that the biggest challenge?
Well, certainly that is one of them. And you're right. I mean, if you look at most abusers or bullies, what is their background? Well, oftentimes it's one that they were bullied. And so you have to get out of this narrative. What most people don't appreciate is that their past, the baggage they carry from their childhoods during certain critical developmental periods, turn into embedded habits. And oftentimes, individuals are not aware of this. I mean, I'm sure you can think of individuals who will sit there and say, geez, I don't understand what's going on. This is my third divorce, and it seems as though when I reflect, I married the same person. If you have no understanding of the baggage that you carry from your past, then you can't change your future. So in part, one has to reflect on, if you will, what they are already manifesting and understand the drivers of that. And one can be helped from that by potentially seeing a therapist, sitting in contemplation, and perhaps journaling about your past, and this will give you insights, and mapping where you've been, the decisions you've made, and look at the drivers of the bad decisions you've made. Try to reflect on them and see the common thread. So this will allow you to see what you've already been manifesting. I also mentioned, as we were discussing this love versus fear narrative, if you also spend time, if you will, clarifying your intention, you'll also understand that, yes, material things are wonderful on one level, but if you're using them to define you, that's not going to help you in any way other than to make you more unhappy. So if you're able to clarify your intention through the lens of being of service, of caring for others, you'll make yourself happier, and you'll also realize that these external signs of quote-unquote success are not ones that ultimately will make you happy. And this is the difference between hedonic happiness, which is associated, if you will, with things or presenting yourselves in the sense that you're seeking pleasure, avoiding pain. And this is shallow and short-lived, versus what we call eudaimonic happiness, which is associated with purpose and meaning. And of course, to have a full, fulfilled life, at the end of the day, unless you focus on that, you will be very unhappy, and you'll make many around you unhappy as well.
Why do we feel so terrible after tasting hedonism?
Well, I'm not sure if everyone feels terrible, but it's funny. I've given this talk and talked about meaning and purpose, and some people say, well, you had everything, and I would just like to try it, make my own decision. But it's really not a decision about giving it up. It's just understanding that it will give you short and shallow pleasure, which is fine for that moment. But if that is what you rely on to make you happy or define who you are, you're going to lead a very, very unhappy life. And you're going to, unfortunately, by promoting this narrative, be around people who also seek the same things. And while, yes, for a period of time, you can enjoy yourself, but in no way is this long lasting. And frankly, it ultimately gets boring. When you have the ability to have everything, as an example, and we look at the billionaire class, these are some of the most unhappy, frankly, oftentimes uninteresting people in the world. Because what drives many of us is, I want to work for X, Y, or Z. And that's great. You're motivated. But when you can have everything immediately, nothing is not available to you, actually your life becomes quite boring and uninteresting. And you end up hanging around with a similar group of people who all they do is go around the world and show off how important they are, or what possessions they have, or what parties they go to, which is probably one of the most shallow, empty experiences anyone could have.
Dr. James Doty, I had so many more questions for you. I feel like we could go on for ages, but I've got to wrap, unfortunately. Very quickly before we go, any new projects, any new books upcoming?
Actually, I've been working on a mental health app, as you know. There are many members in our society, especially adolescents, who are suffering from fear, anxiety, loneliness, depression. And so I've created an app, actually, that not only is inexpensive, but is available 24/7. And it utilizes an emotion assessment engine combined with a conversational AI knowledge base of compassion-focused therapy and psychology, which is then connected to a human-like avatar. So you can talk to the avatar, and believe it or not, unlike other apps that, let's say, chatbots, you can develop an emotional connection to that. And this is not to mean that you substitute it for a human, but you respond to it in a way as you would to a human. And it actually has a profound effect on helping people with these problems. It's what we call a mental health companion or a mental health coach. And it's quite effective. And that's called Happi, Happi, not Y. Happi.ai, and actually it's available for free at the moment for people to sign up. And so it would be great if people would consider doing that, test it out. And we're going to be officially launching it in the next 6 to 8 weeks. So please try that out. And I'm also working on a new book called Gut Instinct, the Neuroscience of Intuition, and why it makes a difference.
Well, my gut tells me you're a good guy. And we'll put a link to Happi.ai at the bottom of the YouTube version of this interview when it is uploaded. Sir, it's been a pleasure learning from you. Thank you very much for joining us, James Doty.
Thank you, and thank all of you who are watching. I appreciate it. And remember, each and every one of us every day has the ability to improve the life of at least one person, sometimes simply by saying hello.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I have to say goodbye now. Take care.
Take care. Sure.